A city shaped by wind and ice clings to the edge of Lake Ontario. Toronto.
We get these dangerous whiteout conditions when a couple of feet of snow can fall within about an hour or so.
In winter, temperatures can plummet to minus 30 degrees, and snow clouds can bury the city in an instant. How can Toronto thrive in this climate? To find out, we will strip the city to reveal its secret inner workings and expose the ingenious technology that allowed engineers to build this icy metropolis. Toronto is the biggest city in Canada and the economic powerhouse of the country. A forest of skyscrapers rises up above its shoreline. The centerpiece is a pinnacle of Canadian engineering, the CN Tower. Built to boost Toronto's broadcasting power, it rises half a kilometer over the city. 5 times higher than the Statue of Liberty, this is the tallest structure in the Western world.
Welcome to the CN Tower.
Every year, it attracts over 1.5 million visitors, with the thrill of being up high.
All right, guys, come on out.
For those who need more adrenaline, there's the Edge Walk.
Come on round. Just pull those trolleys up along with you. Yeah. Excellent.
Teetering 116 stories above the city, these daredevils get a view that is priceless.
Nice one.
The engineering under their feet is just as breathtaking. To survive fierce winds blowing across Lake Ontario, the CN Tower has ingenious technology hidden under its skin. The walls contain nearly 100,000 tons of concrete. Hidden inside them is the secret ingredient that makes this tower so incredibly strong. Over 120 kilometers of thick steel cables stretch from the top down into the foundations to tie the tower into the ground. Together, steel and concrete keep the tower upright, even in the fiercest storms. Wind is not the only force the tower must deal with. The Earth under Toronto is pushing the city upwards because of a geological event nearly 100,000 years ago. Traces of what happened are visible 100 kilometers to the south near Port Colborne. This man knows the rocks around Toronto like the back of his hand. Geologist Nick Isles has found evidence of the city's violent geological past, etched onto the rocks of a quarry.
Well, the fascinating thing about this quarry is that the bedrock surface has been scored very deeply by these very long scratches. And if you look across the area, they all have the same consistent orientation. And this is the hallmark of bedrock that's been scratched by ice. So this is a unique fingerprint of a glacier. And in the bottom of the ice, about 2 kilometers thick, there's boulders and pebbles, and they're dragged over the bedrock surface and they score it. So we can get the direction of ice flow, we can tell how fast it was flowing. And it was flowing from the Toronto area, just behind me, all the way down into the States.
95,000 years ago, Toronto was in the grip of an ice age. Temperatures plummeted and vast glaciers from the Arctic invaded Canada. Where Toronto stands today was a wall of ice nearly 4 times higher than the CN Tower. The glacier was so incredibly heavy, it pushed the Earth's crust nearly half a kilometer into the red-hot rocks below.
Well, imagine this is the Earth's crust. It's brittle, but it's resting on soft plastic mantle material below. So when we grow these ice sheets over tens of thousands of years, we push the crust down into the mantle. But the ice sheets melt very quickly. So they go, but because of rebound of the mantle, the crust is still rising under Toronto today.
Every year, invisible to the naked eye, Toronto's skyline rises 2 millimeters higher, about the thickness of a loonie. It's not much, but anchoring skyscrapers into moving ground is a big challenge for the city's engineers. Clayton Allery works at the excavation site for Toronto's latest high-rises, the West Harbour Towers.
Both of the towers to the south of us are the last 2 projects I worked on. So I've been stuck in this neighborhood for about 8 or 9 years. I seem to spend more time on the job site than I do at home. Sometimes I think my kids like it better that way. This footprint that you see here will house 2 different towers. One tower will be 16 stories tall, the other will be 17 stories. And for all you bird watchers, there'll be a swimming pool in the middle of it all.
Clayton's first task, dig out a huge pit for the tower's foundations.
This is a great foundation. This is better than pouring a concrete pad. This is Mother Nature's concrete. You can't dig through this rock. You have to break through the rock. Digging is virtually impossible. So after about 2.5 months of tearing this place apart, we'll get to be where we want to be.
But then the real trouble starts. Toronto's rising earth creates tension in the rocks that tries to push them into the pit. So the engineers must take special measures. First, they build steel shoring walls to stop soil from breaking loose. 14-meter-long steel anchors pin the walls to the side of the pit. Sensors on them measure how hard the walls are pushing in. Sometimes the team even excavates a giant trench around the site to give the rocks more space. Then they wait, sometimes for months, until the ground finally stops moving.
We have a small area to work within in Toronto, so we need to know what the rock's going to do, and we need to know on what time scale and what range the rock will move. We see a lot of the big movement happens within the first couple of months, and then it dissipates over time.
Once the earth has settled down, the team can build the basement for their tower. And 18 months later, 2 new high-rises will join a packed skyline. Toronto has more skyscrapers under construction than any other city in North America. Thanks to clever foundation engineering, these glass, concrete, and steel giants will stand safely on rocks that keep on moving. But holding up skyscrapers isn't the only challenge for Toronto's engineers. They must also keep the city's traffic going, even in a blizzard. This is the busiest highway in North America, Highway 401. This monster road stretches over 800 kilometers across Canada. Its 18 lanes cut right through Toronto and move a huge amount of traffic. When the snow hits the city, the 401 needs to keep going. A tough job for transport engineers like Andy McKay.
Conditions can deteriorate very, very quickly in this area. We are a major artery into the city of Toronto. Daily traffic on this highway right out front here is the highest in Ontario. These people want to get to work on time, and certainly if we're not out there, they're more than happy to let us know.
It's 5 a.m. and a major snowstorm is heading for the city. Andy's team moves out.
The storm is moving in from the west. It's about 10 minutes from us right now. It's unfortunately going to hit in the peak of rush hour, so it makes it a little bit more challenging. Safe driving out there, Rob. Remember, for every mile of road, there's 2 miles a day.
In winter, the weather in Toronto can change in a flash. Huge clouds race in from Lake Ontario and hit with little warning. Walls of driving snow up to 3 kilometers high smother the city. Visibility on roads can drop to 0. On Highway 401, with 18 jam-packed lanes, that can spell disaster. These ultra-fast snowstorms hit Toronto almost every winter. What causes them? In Toronto Harbor, Nick Isles comes face to face with the culprit, Lake Ontario.
The lake is so deep, so there's an amazing volume of water that's stored in Lake Ontario. So that's trapping energy, heat. So even in the coldest winter, it doesn't freeze. The water, in fact, is cold. If you fill in there, you wouldn't last very long. It's very dangerous, actually. But it's warmer than the air that's flowing over it.
Moist, warm air hovering over the water collides with cold winds racing across the lake. The winds push the warm air 3 kilometers up into the atmosphere, where the temperature drops dramatically. The moisture from the lake freezes almost instantly. It forms clouds bursting with snow that race towards the city. As the front hits Toronto, it slows down, and the clouds bunch up into a huge wall of snowflakes, up to 15 kilometers across. Then they release millions of tons of snow onto the city.
We get these very dangerous whiteout conditions when a couple of feet of snow can fall within about an hour or so. We get a lot of accidents on the freeways.
At the yard, the diggers ready Toronto's weapon of choice, salt.
The entire winter usage out of this yard would entail about 5,000 to 6,000 tons in an average winter.
Because of the snow, Canadians use 360 kilos of salt per person every year, a world record. Luckily, Canada has some of the biggest salt mines in the world. Every year, workers dig out over 2 million tons of salt from this mine near Windsor, west of Toronto. Miners drill holes into the walls and fill them with explosives to blast the salt free. They carefully control the explosions, leaving behind giant pillars that can support the ground above. Some mines ram steel bolts, called guardian angels, into the ceiling. If the salt in the roof starts to shift, the angels will fall, warning the miners. A network of conveyor belts takes the salt to a huge underground crushing mill. Giant rollers crunch the big lumps into tiny grains that can be used as grit. Finally, huge elevators haul the salt 290 meters to the surface. Here, it becomes ammunition for Toronto's war on snow. It takes a whole squadron of snowplows to clear Highway 401.
It's pretty stormy today. This is getting there. This is definitely getting there.
With the storm on its way, they're doing a preemptive strike on the most treacherous spots. Rob controls the salt spreaders from the warmth of his cabin.
When I get up to the ramp, there's 2 lanes going off. When it widens out to 3 lanes, I'm going to shoot it to 10 meters. Which will give me 3 lanes of salt spread. There's days when you can't keep up. I've done some routes 3 times. Just kept going round and around, and it's like 5 hours each time.
In Toronto's long winters, the salt trucks are on call 24/7. Without them, the whole city would grind to a halt. Every year, they use 150,000 tons of salt dug up from under Ontario to keep the highways open. The salt from Ontario's mines clears roads all across Canada, and even the northern United States. But engineers in Toronto must do more than protect cars and trucks. They must also shelter people on foot from the extreme elements. When winter hits Canada's biggest city, getting around can become a nightmare, even for people on foot. But hidden below the streets and skyscrapers of Toronto is a marvel of subterranean engineering that lets the people here escape the weather. Under the city's skin lies a parallel world. It's called Path. 28 kilometers of walkways, shopping malls, and subway stations, carved into the soft ground under the city. "10 kilometers east of downtown, at the Scarborough Bluffs, Nick Isles looks for clues about this very special soil.
It's really a unique story, really, when you think that just a few tens of thousands of years ago, which is nothing to a geologist, ice up to the base of the clouds completely covered this area, left all these extensive deposits.
The shore of Lake Ontario is a window into Toronto's icy past.
These cliffs are eroding back very, very quickly, which is excellent for the geologist. It's not so good if you have a house on top. But for the geologist, it means you can actually get to look at what the city's built on. It's a curious material, really, because it's made up of far-traveled pebbles and boulders. And these have come from a long way away. And then it's mixed in with what is described as rock flour. And if we dissect it, we can see there's a lot of fine paste-like material.
This soil is called till, tiny grains of minerals that used to be big rocks.
In terms of the geology of Toronto, this is the most important layer. because it's thick, sometimes 70 meters thick, and it covers huge areas.
What forces could grind solid rock into flour? "90,000 years ago, a huge glacier was moving over the place where the skyscrapers stand today. The rocks it ripped from the ground tumbled inside the ice for millennia until they turned into tiny grains of till. When the glacier melted, it left behind a thick layer, which Toronto stands on today. Till is soft but firm. It's perfect for the engineers digging new subway tunnels under the city.
We're on a curve at the moment, just coming in under one of the main roads north-south of Toronto.
The team's tunnel boring machine can dig out 300 tons of soil an hour. But the driver must control precisely how much this monster munches.
If you take out too little material, it makes the machine harder to push through the soil. If you take out too much material, you'll create settlement on the surface. Buildings can sink, roads can sink, you create voids on the surface.
The soft soil under Toronto is easy to tunnel through. As the tunnel boring machine digs, it draws the till through its cutter head. A screw conveyor then carries the spoil out of the tunnel. But if the soil at the front is too loose, it enters the machine too quickly. Voids can open up around the tunnel, wrecking the infrastructure above. So John's team injects a liquid behind the cutter head that turns the loose soil into a thick paste. A watertight bulkhead pushes this onto the tunnel face to keep the loose soil in check. This way, the machine can dig almost 40 meters of tunnel a day without damaging the city above.
Each time we mine forward 1.5 meters, we extract approximately 100 to 115 tons, depending on the soil conditions that we're actually going through. So what you see across here is virgin till.
Even as they plow through this soft soil, the team must be ready for nasty surprises, like rocks that not even a glacier could grind down.
More often than not, it's usually boulders that can cause the problems. Time-wise, we never know how much the delay is until we get in to see what size the boulder is. If it's a big one, it could be a few days, it could be a matter of hours. It all depends on what we find when we get out there.
The till can hide nests of boulders the size of a car, impossible to dig through. The crew has to stick jackhammers through gaps in the cutter head and break the boulders into small pieces so the machine can move on.
With tunnelling, you have no reverse gear, so the machine has to be designed for the task ahead. Tunnelling's a very expensive procedure. When the machine is buried and in the ground and tunnelling, there's nothing else you can do. You have to get to the end of the drive.
Digesting the soil under Toronto takes its toll, even on a machine as big as this one.
These are the rippers that are on the front of the TBM. As you can see, the drive has just been completed, so the teeth are fairly well worn. So now we're going to take the cutter head off. We're going to lift it out of the ground, so it's just this little front section, 50 tons worth, and take it back to the yard.
Pulling out the business end of a tunneling machine is a heck of a job, but it's the quickest way to get it to the dentist.
We'll change out all these teeth and replace them with new ones ready for the new drive, which will complete the job.
The team has to replace one set of teeth every week. They'll have to do it many more times as their mechanical moles still have another 5 kilometers of glacial soil to burrow through. By 2020, Toronto's subterranean transport network will grow to over 100 kilometers of train and subway tunnels. They will plug directly into the PATH network, 371,000 square meters of underground city streets. Together, they will allow the people of Toronto to pass under the very skin of their city every day, in heated comfort. Whatever the weather. But as the city expands above and below ground, feeding it with power is another gigantic challenge for engineers. Winter in Toronto is cold and dark. The city's power consumption soars as days get shorter and temperatures plummet. This is a place where they like it cold, even in winter. It's the city's biggest ice hockey arena, the Air Canada Centre. Making ice that can survive a hockey game is both a science and an art.
We've got 200-pound guys traveling at 15 kilometers an hour, stopping on about a quarter of an inch, digging into the ice.
When you make ice in your freezer, you just stick the ice in and forget about it. It's not the same here.
The secret of Brian's perfect hockey ice is hidden 5 meters under the surface. A thick bed of dirt and gravel, covered with styrofoam, insulates the rink from the ground below. A slab of concrete sits on top. 10 kilometers of steel piping filled with a supercoolant chills the concrete to -7 degrees Celsius. The ice makers spray water on top, which freezes instantly. Then a coat of white paint and another layer of water, and the ice is finished, with a perfect thickness of 25 millimeters.
This is probably our last time to measure the ice today. The more times we measure it, the easier it gets at managing it.
1 inch. Making the ice, we have a very, very finite amount of time. We have to really, really scramble. We have an event virtually every night.
Keeping the ice frozen takes a lot of power, even in the middle of winter.
Electricity plays a major role in running this facility. We have 283,000 watt metal halide lights at the top of our arena here to shine on the players.
Our ice plant has 3 125 horsepower chillers, and it's running, especially on a game day like today, all day long.
If there was no electricity here, we would not be playing hockey.
During a game, this rink consumes 4 megawatts of electricity, enough to power over 3,000 homes. But in a city of 2.5 million people, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Nearly a quarter of Toronto's power comes from one of the world's finest natural wonders, 65 kilometers south of the city. Niagara Falls. More water flows over these rocks than any other waterfall in the world. Nick Isles goes to extreme lengths to unearth new secrets about the falls. Most of this water was once ice that melted 20,000 years ago and created 20% of all the fresh water on the planet.
There are 4 Great Lakes above here. All their waters discharge over those falls. This is the ultimate bottleneck. The amount of power and energy that is just coming through here, all the snow melt. It's a tremendous show of the great force of water.
The ancient water from the glaciers has made Niagara Falls the superstar among waterfalls. But when the lights go off and the tourists go home, it gets a lot smaller. At 10 o'clock every night, engineers reduce the flow by half, harnessing the water to generate power. During the day, over 3 million liters of water pass over the falls every second. At night, the engineers siphon off water above the falls and feed 250 million liters a minute through a canal, right to the edge of the Niagara Gorge. 2 huge concrete dam walls hold back all the water. Inside them, giant pipes the width of a bus funnel the water down to the power station. The water spins the turbines, generating nearly 2 gigawatts of electricity, enough to power over 1.5 million homes. When it opened in 1954, this was the biggest hydroelectric power station in the world.
This is the dam that holds the water back for the generating stations. We relocate the water flow to this site because we can take advantage of an extra 60 to 80 foot drop in the water, which gives us a significant amount more energy that's produced through the drop.
Inside the dam wall, 16 generators produce electricity.
Total output for this station is about 1,800 megawatts. It's fed into the grid, and that grid supplies everyone in the province, including the city of Toronto.
Today, water creates over 20% of Toronto's power. The steep drop and the vast amount of glacial water coming over Niagara Falls is a big asset for Toronto. But it's not going to last forever. Niagara Falls is a geological wonder. But it has a weak spot that will eventually lead to its destruction.
The key thing here to what's happening right here is the presence of this very soft rock. It's an ancient mudstone, very soft. It's called a shale. And it supports that cap rock up there. But the shale is very easily eroded, so the falls are always moving backwards.
12,000 years ago, there was no waterfall at Niagara. The face of the falls was 11 kilometers downstream, right on the shore of Lake Ontario. As the water fell over a 50-meter drop, it started to eat into the mudstone at the foot of the falls. It eroded the soft rock at the bottom until the harder cap rock above collapsed. This way, the edge of the falls ground its way backwards through millions of tons of rock to where Niagara is today. And the process hasn't stopped. The falls move back 30 centimeters every 10 years.
all waterfalls recede, but none anywhere in the world are moving back as fast as this one. It's slowed up now because water's taken off for hydroelectric power. In another 20,000 years' time, those falls will have gone.
Until this happens, engineers want to make the most of this natural wonder. To meet the increased demand for electricity, they need to get more water to the power stations. The plan is to dig a gigantic feeder tunnel right under the city of Niagara Falls. The tunnel will be 50% wider than the English Channel Tunnel. A job for the world's largest digging machine, Big Becky. Soon, billions of liters of water will rush through here, but not a drop can escape. Today, engineers are installing a waterproof membrane that will cover the whole length of the tunnel.
If the fresh water being delivered through the tunnel were to get into that surrounding rock, it would cause the rock to swell and damage the concrete liner. The membrane is applied throughout the entire length of the tunnel, 10.2 kilometers. Gets fully tested before the concrete gets installed in front of this membrane layer.
The plastic membrane is just a few millimeters thick. The workers must now cover it with over 700,000 tons of concrete, all without making the tiniest tear.
This truck is coming from our drop shaft 100 meters down from the surface. There are 17 trucks per pour. Concrete mixer is getting placed onto the sliders. It's going to get slid over to the remixer. It's going to get pumped onto the floor. We're about to pump a few more meters of concrete into the line before we close the hatch and switch to our final injection line. Go ahead, start the pump.
Each pour can take up to 7 hours. The team will work 7 days a week to line the remaining 4 kilometers of tunnel. Then they'll hook it up to the river to feed in nearly 2 billion liters of extra water every hour.
A year from now, when the tunnel's complete, you wouldn't want to be standing here because there'd be 500 cubic meters per second of water flowing through this area.
The new tunnel will boost Niagara's power output by over 25%. It will help freeze the ice at the Air Canada Centre and keep the players in the spotlight. It will light the streets of Toronto and keep people warm. All in all, the water from the glaciers can power an additional 160,000 homes. But when winter turns to spring and the snow melts, how can Toronto stop its streets from flooding? Snow and ice are not the only threats to Toronto. In the spring, melting snow and pouring rain can flood the city. Luckily, Toronto has a natural network of drains. Over 400 kilometers of deep ravines run right through it. This one, just off Highway 401 in Pickering, is over 20 meters deep. What made these dramatic scars in the cityscape?
These valleys are very common across the Toronto area, but they're very unusual because you have relatively small creeks, but they're sitting in these very confined valleys with very steep slopes. Normally canyons of this size record millions of years of erosion, but here these have been cut by very young rivers.
Just over 12,000 years ago, the ice here began to melt. It formed a huge lake held in check by the edge of the glacier. When the water finally broke through its icy banks, it exposed the lake bed around the edge. Then, over centuries, rivers of melting ice carved deep scars into the soft till. This event created Toronto's dramatic ravines.
That would have been the shoreline and the cliff of old glacial Lake Iroquois. In a matter of weeks, that lake drained catastrophically, and the rivers, typical of all the areas across Toronto, cut down through the soft glacial sediments, leaving these very steep-sided ravines, which are now the natural drainage ways across the city.
But as Toronto expanded, it grew over the ravines. Many of them are now hidden under the streets of the city. And the creeks that once flowed freely are now hemmed into narrow pipes and sewers underground. They can't move as much water as the open ravines, putting huge pressure on the city's drains. In 2005, Toronto suffered the most expensive natural disaster in its history. A massive storm overwhelmed the sewers, destroying roads and houses.
In my experience, I'd never seen anything of that magnitude. When you see most of the city underwater, sections of arterial roads in the city completely washed out, literally washed out, it gives you a sense of just how significant that storm was.
Now, Michael and his team are working hard to defend the city from future disasters. Their first job is to fortify the remaining ravines.
Tucked in behind the top edge of that embankment are a number of houses, and so ultimately we want to make sure that we protect those houses and protect the residents.
The soft banks of the ravine wash away easily. The team must make them strong enough to resist the raw power of floodwater.
What we want to do is to stay one step ahead of Mother Nature, if you will. We've actually had to cut the stream bank further back and then harden that bank by putting in this very hard, very heavy armor stone, as we call it.
Michael's team must finish the job before the next big storm hits.
Left untouched, there's no telling the kind of damage that the erosion that the river flows would create.
Ice forged the land Toronto stands on, and engineers in the city have turned it to their advantage. Thanks to the ingenious inventions hidden beneath the skin of this city that clear its streets, shelter its residents, and hold up its skyscrapers. Toronto has risen from the shores of Lake Ontario to become a city born out of ice.